Imagine a story born from a deep betrayal, a story that birthed a legend. This is one of my favorite tales, and I'm thrilled to share it with you. Like many incredible sagas, ours begins in the Japan of the 1970s. Back then, Sony was a rising star, a powerhouse in electronics, but they had absolutely no connection to the nascent world of video games. In fact, the gaming industry as we know it barely existed. But Sony's reputation, especially for its pioneering work in electronics, drew the brightest young minds. Every ambitious, tech-savvy student dreamed of working there. Our hero, Ken Kutaragi, was one of them. Ken was a prodigy, a naturally brilliant child who consistently earned top grades from elementary school through university. His passion wasn't just electronics, it was understanding how things worked. Toys, radios, household appliances. Ken loved to open them up, tinker with their insides, and unravel the mysteries of their engineering. His goal was clear: to study electronics and communication, a field perfectly suited to his talents. He easily gained admission to his chosen program, but then life took an unexpected turn. Just as Ken began university, he received devastating news. His father was battling advanced cancer. His father, spending most of his time in bed, could no longer manage the small printing shop he'd run for years. Someone needed to step in. Ken, needing money for his tuition and realizing he couldn't continue without his father's support, felt compelled to take over the business. Though he didn't want to abandon his studies, he told himself, "I must do this for my father." He went to his father, ready to announce he was dropping out. But his father, with unwavering clarity, refused. "No," he said. "You are a smart man. You won't spend your life in a shop like me. Sell our possessions, study what you want, pursue any career, but I have one request: excel at whatever you do." Ken was stunned. His father's words became his guiding star: make him proud by achieving his dream. And that dream, you guessed it, was to be an engineer at Sony. At Sony during that time, things weren't exactly rosy. The company was navigating another crisis, limiting its new hires. But Ken applied, worked tirelessly through the interviews, and became one of the select few engineers to join Sony. It was 1983, a new chapter for both Ken and the company. Ken was now an established engineer, building his life, and the concept of the game industry was just beginning to emerge globally. Don't imagine today's massive industry, of course. It was still in its infancy, but companies were already making serious money. Nintendo was a clear leader, the first name that came to mind for home consoles. Ken's own introduction to Nintendo consoles happened by chance, while he was in an electronics store looking for a computer for his son. There, he saw a device with "family computer" emblazoned across it, far cheaper than a PC. Its affordability piqued his interest. What is this thing, he wondered. He bought both a computer and a Nintendo console, bringing them home for his son to choose. Soon, Ken noticed something striking. His son barely touched the computer when the console was around. A tiny box plugging into the TV, delivering games with graphics that were amazing for its time, and it was cheap and easy to use. A powerful idea began to form in Ken's mind. He decided then and there that no matter what, he would create a console under the Sony brand. If not now, then someday. Months after Ken's revelation, Sony was preparing to launch a new technology, a device capable of displaying 3D graphics. But it wasn't for games, it was developed for filmmaking. The device, however, failed to gain traction. It was simply too expensive for the era, limiting its customer base. Yet, that costly product left one person utterly captivated: Ken Kutaragi. The moment he saw it, his console vision ignited. He thought, if we could make a sleek, 3D-capable console, things would be completely different. This was the mid-80s, mind you, A 3D console sounded like pure science fiction, almost impossible, but Ken believed it was worth pursuing. He began to plan, and his calculations revealed a daunting truth. If he started development today, a console wouldn't be ready for another 10 years. You might think this would deter Ken, but it did the opposite. He now had a new, decade-long objective, a passion project to pursue. His first step was to find a partner. Nobody at Sony understood the console business. He needed a company that did, and the first name that came to mind was Nintendo. Ken tried to reach out, but Nintendo, riding high on its success, simply ignored him. Sony, in the gaming world of that era, was less than an ant. Nintendo was a giant. Ken's attempts to connect were futile. He needed a new strategy, something to grab Nintendo's attention and bridge the gap between Sony and the gaming titan. Around that time, Nintendo was developing its next console, and Ken saw an opportunity. Ken had always been unimpressed with the sound technology in Nintendo's previous consoles. He realized that while Sony wasn't a game company, they were masters of sound. He approached Nintendo with a simple, irresistible offer. Your current sound chips are inadequate. With our new technology, we can give you vastly superior sound, and it won't change your costs. Nintendo, receiving such a compelling proposal from Sony, accepted without hesitation. Same price, much better audio. Nintendo was usually a closed company, rarely sharing its console projects or importing outside tech, but sound wasn't a core competitive secret for them. If Sony could do it better for the same money, why not? Ken was ecstatic. He had his connection, a foot in the door for his dream console. But Ken's success at Nintendo stirred up a hornet's nest back at Sony. When executives heard, they were furious. How dare you engage in such a deal without consulting us, they fumed. Part of Sony's reaction stemmed from their deep distrust of digital technology, believing it inferior to analog and merely a passing fad. They tried to block Ken. Don't get involved in this. But Ken ignored them, secretly continuing to develop the sound chip he'd promised Nintendo. The board, however, found out again. They summoned Ken to a tense meeting. Arguments erupted. Ken, you're making a mistake. Stop this project. But Ken countered passionately. If we do this, we gain a connection to the gaming industry, and the gaming industry is growing. This is important. As the argument raged, the meeting room door burst open. In walked Norio Ohga, Sony's CEO. Ohga was a fascinating character. As a young man, he had studied music and sound. When Sony was developing its recording devices, a curious Ohga visited their labs, recorded his voice, and listened. The sound quality was terrible. He told Sony's engineers, "Your recording device is rubbish." They were offended, of course, telling him a young man like him couldn't possibly understand. But Ohga, with his electronics aptitude, tinkered with the device, adjusted its settings, and dramatically improved the sound. He then presented it back to them, saying, "See, this is how you do it." Impressed, Sony hired him as a consultant, then full-time, and he eventually rose to CEO. Ohga was a stubborn, headstrong leader, which is why Ken's passionate defense resonated with him. Ohga listened intently to Ken, then turned to the board. "Leave the boy alone," he commanded. "Let him do what he wants." With Ohga's protection, Ken successfully developed the sound technology. Nintendo integrated it into their hugely popular Super Nintendo console, officially establishing a business connection between Sony and Nintendo. Ken now had his next goal, to deepen the relationship. He identified Nintendo's weakness: storage technology. "You've been making consoles for years," Ken argued, "but you're still using ancient floppy disk technology. Let us integrate our new technology, and together, we'll build a revolutionary console." Ken was talking about the compact disc, or CD, a groundbreaking technology that offered vastly more storage than floppy disks or Nintendo's cartridges. Nintendo considered Ken's CD proposal and agreed, logical, let's do this together. This marked the beginning of a major partnership. They would co-develop a new console, primarily a Nintendo product, but with significant input from Sony. Its name, the Nintendo PlayStation. Prototypes were built, progress was made. For Ken, developing a new console with Nintendo was a dream come true, bringing him closer to his ultimate goal. This CD-based console was just the start. He envisioned moving to 3D technology next, then approaching Nintendo again to build a 3D game console. But at this critical juncture, one of the most significant betrayals in gaming history unfolded. Sony officially announced its partnership with Nintendo, proclaiming they were working together on a CD-ROM console. Then, just one day after Sony's announcement, Nintendo delivered a historic betrayal. They announced a partnership with Philips for their CD technology. Philips, at the time, was a major rival to Sony. This announcement caused outrage at Sony. They had an agreement, they were working together, they'd announced it publicly, and then, a day later, Nintendo said, "No, we're with Philips." But why would Nintendo pull such a stunt at the last minute? The answer lies in Nintendo's inherent distrust of external partners. As I mentioned earlier, Nintendo was a closed company. Its CEO believed they had given Sony too much control over the console project. When Sony publicly declared, "We're in the console business," Nintendo's suspicions skyrocketed. Nintendo feared Sony would use them to enter the gaming industry, then abandon them and go solo. They worried Sony was gaining too much information and decided to cut ties preemptively. It was an easy decision for Nintendo because, remember, Sony was still an ant in the gaming world. Nintendo was the undisputed giant. So, they simply walked away, partnering with Philips for a CD-based console. Emergency meetings were called at Sony. All fingers pointed at Ken. Everyone was furious, screaming about the humiliation. But Ken, despite his shattered dreams, refused to give up on entering the console business. He devised a new tactic. He would rally Norio Ohga, the company's top executive, to his side, and he would do it by infuriating him. Ken began his pitch. "Look," he said, 8 years ago we developed 3D display technology. Based on my research, we can now produce a game console using this technology within 2 years. Let's do this ourselves. Let's beat Nintendo at their own game." Ohga initially burst out laughing. "Are you serious?" he scoffed. But then he paused, considering Ken's conviction. "Wait, can we really do this?" Ken, seeing Ohga soften, pressed his advantage. "Absolutely. We can't let them get away with this. We'll bury them in history." Ohga was already furious at Nintendo for the broken agreement. But beyond Ohga, there were 7 other board members, and all 7 were 100% against this project. Yet Ohga, fueled by Ken's passion, slammed his hand on the table. "Go," he declared, "and make that console. Sony needs this."